Welcome back, everyone. It is so happy to welcome everyone back to A.P.E.X events. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Lynn Vartan, and in addition to teaching in the music department, I also curate this lecture series, and it is such an honor and privilege to be offering these events in 2020, the weirdest year of them all, but what a joy it is to bring back a tradition of normalcy here for you. And also, happy homecoming week, yay! And welcome to all those watching at home. It's so great to be live streaming and to have people in the room. So what a special moment to be coming back together to share in scholarship and share in history this week. So usually the first event of the season is an Alumni Spotlight because we have homecoming. It's been such a great collaboration with the Alumni Department. But this year, our alumni is a family member who is a professor and has been a member of our community for over 30 years. It's just so cool. Our Alumni Spotlight is actually a professor spotlight this year. So let me tell you a little bit about him. So David Lee was Utah's first poet laureate. In 2001, he was finalist runner-up for United States Poet Laureate. He is the author of 24 volumes of poetry, including the Porcine Canticles, A Legacy of Shadows, So Quietly the Earth, Last Call, and Mind Tailing, among others. A former seminary student and semi-pro baseball player and hog farmer, he has a PhD with a concentration in John Milton. He is one of our very own. He taught at Southern Utah University for over 3 decades, where he received every teaching award given by the university, including being named Professor of the Year on 3 occasions. His additional awards include multiple fellowships from the National Endowment of the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities, Western States Book Award, Mountain and Plains States Book Award, Critics' Choice Award, Utah Book Awards, Elkhorn Poetry Prize, Evolutionary Poem of the Year, Utah Governor's Award for Lifetime Achievement in the Arts, Utah Governor's Merit Award in the Humanities, and an Honorary Doctorate of Human Letters. The Utah Humanities Council and Utah Education Association named him one of the top 12 writers in all Utah literary history. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Lee.
I'm scared out of my mind. Thank you. Thank you for letting me come back here to home. Got to spend several hours this past weekend with one of my former students and later colleagues, Rob Bahunin. I told him I thought I'm going to be pretty nervous about this, and he said, "Dave, you have 2 talents. One's tabula rasa, you're just a blank slate. Number 2 is in media res. Don't worry about introductions and conclusions, just sort of jump in because that's the only place you belong." So, here we go. I think we have 2 things in common, all of us in here. One is we have an attachment to this university. I'm assuming that most of us are deeply in love with it. And number 2, we have lived through one of the worst years in the history of the United States of America in many, many directions and angles, but of course that includes our love affair with COVID. which we're still celebrating. I see your masks out there everywhere. I don't have it, but I will try not to spit on you in any way from up here. I've spent a lot of time this summer writing COVID poems. What can you do when you're sequestered in a tiny little town on the Oregon coast and you don't see anyone for sometimes days on end until you go to Costco's, and then they tell you stay 9 feet away from everybody. So I've done that, and I want to read a COVID poem. I was once told somewhere around 50% of new jokes in the United States of America begin with the line, well, there were two guys in a bar. So this is an update, 2020. Two men in a bar, finishing, paid, walked out, down the sidewalk, 40 feet away, strides the blonde, 6 feet tall with a big bopper ponytail, sashaying her way uptown, every scintilla of her booty in motion, slithers alongside and going by, cuts her eyes at them like those young novias did in Spain 50 years ago. And he wondered then, and even more now, why the hell he ever left to come back to this unholy, forsaken place. And he said to the other one, damn, Johnny Lane, did you see that butt-kicking mask she was wearing? Well, here's where I want to go today. I want to do my own Hall of Fame, my own Hall of Honor. Some of you know this, some of you don't. It doesn't matter anyway. But for 30 years, we ran a writers' conference, a summer writers' conference here. That's the longest running writers' conference in the history of the state of Utah. And I took great pride in being a little bitty part of it. But we had some heroes who came. And I want to reintroduce a few of them back to you. Some of you were there. I've seen you, and you will remember some of these people. The conference began here on campus a few years. Pretty good success, built a little bit of an audience. We moved it to Bryan Head. At that time, Continuing Ed was wanting to develop a Bryan Head campus. And that was quite successful, but it was overly expensive and the travel was hard. And then the Holiday Inn opened their doors to us and let us work. And that was when it happened, when we really blossomed. And I'm going to give one name who was a fulcrum in it happening. His name was William Stafford. Poets and Writers magazine had sent out postcards to 1,000 poets across the nation and asked all of them to put two names on the back of back then, 2-cent postcard, whatever, 58 cents or whatever it is now. And wasn't that a wonderful idea? Everybody could put their own name and then one other person's. And for 10 years, I would meet people who would say, by the way, I was nominated to be an outstanding living writer in America by Poets and Writers. Oh, yeah, well, about 1,000 nominees for it. But Stafford more than doubled the next person up. He was incredibly well known and incredibly beloved. And when we brought him, we had people come to our conference from Boston, from Florida, from Alaska, from Arizona, from California. I mean, we were suddenly on the map. And Stafford fell in love with our school, with our campus. He came back many times. I'm thinking 10 times. Morty's in front of him. He even wrote a poem to you in your house about finding Jesus behind a box of Post Toasties in a Hindu's house at a party one night. But Stafford enjoyed it here. One time he came back and brought his son Kim, and they did convocation. Kim liked it so much that he asked me, if a job opening ever comes in your creative writing program, may I apply for it? And I said, well, that'd be wonderful if we had a creative writing program. We got exactly 2 courses, period, but we'd love to have you come back, even for our salaries. And then he rethought his notion of that, of course. Stafford was not only beloved, he was a major figure in American poetry. I want to tell you the story of one poem. He wrote a poem every morning of his life, and he would have 3 piles on his desk. I've been there and seen the desk. One that he's actively, one that he's revising, one that he's done everything he can, and they're out in the mail to magazines. He wrote a poem, and it's one of those moments that writers have where he started shaking, and he knew he had done something larger than himself. He knew this is a poem he can stake a lot on. He took it to his family at dinner. They hated it. His daughter wept, said, "Dad, don't ever, ever send that poem out. I would be ashamed. That's so cruel." He took it to his writers group. I don't know how many of you go to a writers group, but they said writers grouply things. "Well, you should take out 3 articles, and I think you go off your track here, and I think you could have a little bit of it." You know, that's why we have lines like tra-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. He just thought, all right, that's fine. He kept the poem for a while and finally decided, I've got to let it have a life of its own. He sent it to a literary magazine. It was turned down. Again, turned down, again, turned down, again, turned down. Well, it's either 13, 16, or 18. I've heard all 3 numbers. He told me 16. Different magazines turned the poem down before he sent it to, quote, quote, a little nothing magazine. Sent it with 2 other poems. They took those 2 but wouldn't take this poem. And he wrote them back and said, "Nope, sorry. Send them all back. You have to publish all of them or none of them." They had already gone to galley proofs. Would have been very time consuming and expensive. So he bullied his way through. They published the poem. It was now had its life of its own. He finished the manuscript that he was writing and titled the manuscript after that poem, Traveling Through the Dark. That's considered by many poets to be the best known American poem of the second half of the 20th century. And many say one of the top 10 very best poems. It's a poem that will be very familiar to many of you in here because this is typical for Stafford. He would pick out the commonest of topics, subject matters, and then represent them to you in a way that would imbue them with absolute significance. And this is one of those smashing, significant poems. It's happened to, I would assume, almost every person in the room living in the Cedar City area. Twisty, windy little mountain roads, you drive in them, you're going to drive by a carcass, aren't you? A roadkill, usually a deer. 99 times out of 100, swerve out, go around, keep going along the way, maybe curse a little. Why won't people slow down while you're getting your speed back up to 3 miles over the legitimate speed limit? You know, that's what we do. We lived in Paragouna 13 years. Never once in 13 years did a month go by that we didn't have a carcass on the road. I mean, it was a way of life. Well, this is role modeling for me. He did something that I had never done before. Traveling through the dark, I found a deer dead on the edge of the Wilson River Road. It's usually best to roll them over into the canyon. That road is narrow. To swerve might make more dead. By glow of the tail light, I stumbled back of the car and stood by the heap. A doe. A recent killing. She had stiffened already, almost cold. I dragged her off. She was large in the belly. My fingers touching her side brought me the reason. It was warm. Her fawn lay still inside, alive, never to be born. Beside that mountain road, I hesitated. The car aimed ahead, its lowered parking lights. Under the hood purred the steady engine. I stood in the warm glow of the exhaust, turning red. Around our group, the wilderness listened. I thought hard for us all. My only swerving. And then I pushed her over the edge into the river. What an amazing, amazing piece of writing. Next poet I want to throw out for you, who is highly beloved, would be my nominee for the outstanding poet to ever write in the state of Utah. He was from Wales. Came to Utah for reasons God knows, I don't. He didn't seem to know either, but he wound up here. His name was Leslie Norris. He was one of 3 finalists for the Poet Laureate of England position. He withdrew his nomination because he thought he would be leaving. Some of you remember him, Jim, little bitty short guy. So he loved to read here, and he would read like this. And sometimes he had me bring him a little box one time so he could stand up. And I remember once at the writers' conference, they were going to take a picture of him by Shauna. I think it was you. And Kitty Norris said, no, you won't have it, Shauna, you sit down, Leslie, you stand up. I will not have my husband being compared to one of the dwarfs, and you as Snow White. This will not happen. So, but great personality, and what a tremendous storyteller. I knew him by one poem before I met him. It was called The Ballad of Billy Rose. And it's the story of a boxer, a pugilist, and it's probably the best poem about boxing that's ever been written. I did not know the other side of him. He had an amazing depth, an amazing personality, and he wrote a love poem for his wife, Kitty, that I personally think is one of the probably half dozen, anyway, great love poems in the English language, certainly the American English language. It's, I'll tell you this about he and Kitty. They had the RH blood factor difference before they knew what to do about it. And they were never able to have a child. And they wanted children, they loved children, they would have been wonderful parents. In a latent sense that moves into this poem. The poem is called Hudson's Geese. And Hudson was W.H. Hudson. He was the Peter Matheson, or in our local area, the Jim Ayton, wildlife environmental expert, an incredibly popular writer at the time. And Leslie remembered reading Hudson as a young boy and remembered a story of 2 geese. And he used that for the symbol and metaphor for this poem. Now, little refreshment to think about it because it's important to this poem. Geese migrate. We drove here from Oregon 2 days ago and we saw wonderful migrations. They're beginning their southern migration now. Where we live in Seaside is a northern nesting ground, and we get to watch the clutch and the little guys grow into adolescence, and then they take them south so that they can move away from parents, separate and find new mates and not interbreed. And the other thing about geese is they're monogamous. Utah is one state where that is one polysyllabic word I've never yet had to define. I don't read this poem in Texas, my home state, because I never get past the introduction there. It's just too big of a word, if you will. I think that's everything I want to say background about the poem. Let's let you hear this love poem, beautiful love poem. Hudson's Geese. Hudson tells us of them, the 2 migrating geese, she hurt in the wing, indomitably walking the length of the continent, and he circling overhead, calling his distress. they could not have lived. Already I see her wing scrape past the bone as she drags it through the rubble. A fox, maybe, took her in his snap jaws. And what would he do? The point of his wheeling, gone. The wilderness of air turned instantly to winter. By his falling cries would warn the guns of him. Oh, if a fowler dropped him, let it have been quick, pellets striking brain and heart, so that only his weight came down, senseless, and nothing but his body to enter the dog's mouth. I don't think I know a better love poem than that one. In many ways, and without doubt, the most popular writer that we ever brought to this campus or to the Writers' Conference was my adopted big brother and very, very close friend, William Clefcorn. It's easy for me to say, Clefcorn came to our campus maybe 100 times. And I can say that because we hired him as a sabbatical replacement, and he taught for a semester for us 5 days a week. So I don't remember how long a semester is, but you can do the math, and that comes up pretty close. And then we had him come back regularly to do readings, and then he was a major fixture in our summer writing program, if you will. Oh, by the way, let me go back. Let me tell a Leslie Norris story. I had a 6-year period in my life where I just stayed awfully busy as a poet. That's not a statement about me. It's just, I did that. And when I would do readings, I made it a practice to read at least one poem by some other poet during my readings. And I guess the poem during those 6 years that I read more than any other was Hudson's Geese. Well, I read that poem at a small town, doesn't matter where. Brigham City means nothing. Okay. I read it, gave my reading. At the end of it, they had the book table and sign books and talk to people and wish people well and have people say, how'd you get your poems published? If you can, I sure ought to. I'm better than you. You know, okay, good, we'll talk about that. And I noticed in the conversation there was a fellow standing right over here. He wouldn't come up. He was just standing, but he was looking at me. I knew he had something he needed to get off his chest and mind. So we did the last thank you and God bless you and good luck and goodbye. And I turned. He was staring at me. I stuck out my hand and said, hi, I'm Dave. And he came over and gave me one of those kind of handshakes. And he said, can I ask you a question? I said, yes, sir, please. That poem you read about them ducks? Oh, yeah. Was that a poem about our Second Amendment rights? And back to Stafford, I thought hard for us all, my only swerving. And I looked him in the eye and said, I believe you're right. And he said, I thought so. And I felt so successful. I helped a person thoroughly enjoy his first poetry reading to which he ever came. Well, okay, that's last of Leslie. Clefcorn. Clefcorn probably had the strongest, largest personality of any human I ever knew in my life. He was bigger than life. He was the state poet of Nebraska for over 30 years. He wasn't named to a term, he was named for life. He is considered by many critics to be the finest American poet of the American Midwest ever. I'm not qualified to participate in that kind of judging, but I certainly would not argue against it. He was a monument to poetry and poetics, and I think he turned more people on to poetry than certainly any other person that I know. He was completely addictive. when I picked out my gallery of heroes, Jan would ask me who are they going to be. I came up with 6 maybe that I was going to talk about. She put them in order. She said, you'll put Bill Stafford first, you'll put Leslie there, but third needs to be Clefcorn, doesn't it? Well, it was going to be, but I said, okay, great suggestion, Jan, and we'll do that. So 2 days ago, she asked me, do you know the poems that you're going to work with? And I said, pretty much settled in. Which one are you going to do by Clefcorn? And I said, probably one from Alvin Turner's Farmer. There's a poem I really liked. I like to talk about it. And she said, no, actually, you won't be doing that poem. She said, read your favorite poem. Crossing the Tracks? Prove It? Sunday in the Rocking Chair? And she said, no, none of that. Your favorite poem, Counting the Cows. All right, this is obviously my favorite poem because it's Jan's. But it's a good choice. I love reading this poem. It's been a long time since I've done so. I think this poem, and I can see why she says, for those of you who haven't met him, this is a good introduction to him and the kind of personality and the way his brain worked. And for those of you who did know him, I think this will bring back into a focus the big guy. Counting the Cows. Clefcorn had a big voice, basso profundo. I've tried to imitate it. It becomes silly. So I'll just read it the best I can in my tin voice. Because earlier in the day I walked fence lines, I know that none has escaped or walked off. And though I realize that should the count fall short, I'd have 2 options. Count again or shrug my shoulders. I go to the field to count them anyway, knowing as I do that counting is itself sufficient cause for counting. Something sweet in the accumulation, you understand? And if the count should complement the ledger, how much sweeter then the effort. And if the count falls short, as occasionally it does, always I choose to shrug my shoulders. My consolation more than equal to potential loss. The credit being this, that I have seen and inhaled at dusk the lovely bulk of cow, that its path returns no less than takes me away from home. All this is what my grandfather in the course of an autumn morning more or less informs me. We are in that room where grandmother died, her body at last a fence post under a hand-tied quilt. And before the sun quite drops behind its familiar hill, I will be moving in my father's familiar Chevrolet, gravel pelting its underside like the rain that so far prayer has not even been able to induce. Dusk. At my left, I see the darkening silhouettes of grandfather's cows, their heads lowered as if ritual into the occasional nourishment of bunch grass. 1, 2, 3. All there. Each cud in a land of milk and honey, you understand? And accounted for. Well, Jan, that's for you. Yeah. Bill Clefcorn. Then where do I want to go? I need to get my notes back out here. How am I doing? All right. I'm going to reverse my order for just a moment. We brought Jim Heinen to the campus. He directed the Centrum programs and in Port Townsend, Washington, some of the finest arts programs in the nation. He is a fine writer, novelist. He wrote a book of vignettes, The Red Schoolhouse, the little boys going to school. A wonderful book, A Suitable Church. He had moved to Oregon, and his father wrote him from Iowa saying, "Have you found a suitable church?" And he had to say, "Oh, Father, there are no churches here. It rains. We have rain instead of church. But there's still a strong Protestant God inside my chest and a lovely heart beating the drum for him." Yeah, that's Jim Heinen. He wrote a poem that I'm dearly in love with. I only heard him read it one time, and I thought then, I'm going to make a claim on that poem. It's called Staying with Old People. Now, for artists, poets who spend a bit of time out on the road, workshops and reading and traveling, oh my heavens, you get where blankety blank is no longer the curse word. The worst curse word you know is Holiday Inn. And the only one that's worse than that is Velma's Cafe. Is there a Velma's here? I didn't mean it if there was. I mean, you just get so tired of motels and cafe food and just, and now and then someone will come along and say, "Would you like to stay with us?" And almost always, even when it's a horrible experience, you're glad you did because you got to be with people. Well, this is a beautiful poem. It's not a horrible experience at all. It contains one of the greatest images for love that I've ever heard in my life. Now, when I taught creative writing, and frankly, I didn't do that very often, but when I did teach creative writing, one of my assignments was based on the postulate, the ultimate effect of a poem, or the ultimate appeal of a poem, is to create the effect of an abstraction without making direct reference to it. Now, if that makes no sense at all to you, the assignment I would give would be write a love poem. And you have one rule in writing the poem. You may not use the word love. You must create it in front of you. Do you follow? And so normally you find an image, you find an object that will be love. Well, probably the most famous one in the English language is from Robert Burns, and he used the abstraction, but he said, "My love is a red, red rose." Well, Flores Telegraph Delivery adopted that and convinced the American nation that the symbol of love is the red rose, and that's how they sell 8 billion of them every Valentine's Day that comes down. What a nice gimmick that one was. Well, Jim Heinen picked an image that I don't think any other poet in the history of the world would. I'll go ahead and give it to you. You'll hear it anyway. False teeth. Okay? Some of us belong to that club, don't we? All right, we'll see ourselves there. This is called Staying with Old People. I knew I'd like them when I saw their old black car. Its long, gentle dents said something about kindness, about how to meet an adversary. Do you suppose the greatest kindness is thoughtless? He gets up early and makes tea. He takes his false teeth out of the glass and refills it with warm water. Her teeth are still in there, warming up. When she comes, those warm teeth slide into her warm mouth so easily, she hardly notices her own smile. Jim Heinen, I love you, but I wish you had a peacock feather and I had written that poem. That's one I covet. What a gorgeous thing. Well, okay. This is one I want to try to do for, I guess, the first time. One of the major meetings of my life took place in our writing program on this campus. I had nothing to do with the setting up of this meeting. I owe this to my beloved colleague, Danielle Dabrowski. She had, I think, I've got the story right, I think she went to the AWP conference and got to meet Eleanor Wilner. In any case, she found out that we could bring Eleanor to our campus for not very much money at all, sponsored by AWP. And we did bring her. Now, I knew of Eleanor. I had not met her. I knew of her. She and I both published books with the old Copper Canyon Press. And I knew my editor, Sam Hamill, adored her, loved her work, just thought she was the best thing out there going. And I had read a few of her poems. I'm sorry to say I hadn't really focused down on them. And I wouldn't have without Danny having brought her here. I did teach her book in my poetry class and just was bowled over, knocked out at the brilliance of this woman. I even called my editor, Hamill, and said, tell me more about her. And he said, you really don't know, do you? I guess I really don't. What is it that I don't know this time? Well, she's a MacArthur genius. Oh, well, there's that. In any case, to cut to the chase, she came to the campus, came to my class, had her reading, which was one of the best readings I've ever heard in my life. And after it was over, I talked to her, and she said, I've got tomorrow open. Is it okay if I stay in the motel an extra day? Well, yeah, fine, yeah. Then, brain flash, I didn't have a class that tomorrow, the next day. Said, would you be interested in going for a little drive around southern Utah? I can take you to a lot of petroglyph and pictograph sites. I've been doing some research and thinking about a book. Yes, let's do that. Pick her up at 9 o'clock in the morning. I shouldn't even tell this story. Now you'll think it's something vulgar. It's really not. It's almost embarrassing to tell it, I guess, because it's going to sound braggadocio. I don't mean it that way. Picked her up at 9. Got her in the car, seat belt up. Said, I'm going to start off by taking you to Parowan Gap. It's a Solunar shrine, and it's just really, really a gorgeous thing. And I've been out with some of the natives, First Nation people here, and I can give you a bit of a reading that I have some confidence in. Well, that would be wonderful. That would be good. I felt a glow at that moment, like I described with William Stafford, when you hit that one poem where you realize, whoa, something's different here. Well, okay, something's different here. I started the car, pulled it out. I don't think I went 2 blocks, but I know I did not go a mile. I had to pull the car over to the side of the road, put it in park, and I looked at her, and she reached out and grabbed me and said, where the hell have you been? We got separated shortly after your birth. She became my sister to this day, and I adore her. I think she's one of the 2 brightest people I've ever known in my life. I think she's one of the very best poets I've ever known in my life. So that's more than you ever wanted to know, but that's too bad if you didn't. Now you do. The poem is from a new book of hers, or a recent book of hers, Tourist in Hell. That's a very appropriate book for 2020, isn't it? I think that's what most of us have been for this year. tourist in hell. This poem is called Of a Word, and I think it's a brilliant poem. I think it's an ars poetica. It's about the art of poetry, and it says as much about how a poet's mind not does work, but should work, as anything I know of. Much better than Archibald MacLeish's ars poetica, a poem should not mean but be. This one's Of a Word. It starts with 2 lines in prose. English asks, what does it mean? Italian asks, how does it want to be said? Now, I think that's an absolutely brilliant little 2 lines on there. I'd like to give you an example, if I may, of what she's talking about. One of the most beautiful, I don't know if you're here, Jim Harrison. If you are, I should have you come up and do this, because you've got a better accent than I do and probably know it better than I do. But one of the most beautiful pieces of writing in all of literature is Canto 5 of Dante's Inferno. And if you're only going to read that in Dante, and you are not going to get past Last Judgment if you don't. God will punish you for it. You need that in your background and on your syllabus and on your bibliography and on your Vita sheet when you go for Last Judgment. I read Canto 5 of the Inferno. It's the story of Francisco and Paolo, a couple who were caught in the act of illicit love. And they were put to death together. And their punishment in the first circle of hell is to be conjoined for, as we say in Utah, time and all eternity, whirling in a wind, spinning our way through the afterlife. Dante calls them over. He has that power and asks, what happened? How can you be punished for an act of love? And she says, Amor, cianulo, amata, amor, perdona. Me prese del costui, pierse forte, che, come vera, ancor no me abandona. And if you did not hear the euphony, the poetry in that, it's because the person who delivered it to you did a piss poor job of it with a Texas accent. That's just an amazing piece of writing. I've worked for years trying to, just those 3 lines, trying to get a perfect translation. Can't do it. I can tell you what it means. Here's my translation. Love absolves no one from the act of loving, and it seized me so strongly that, as thou seest, it does not even now, even here, release me. Well, isn't that just dreadful? That's the best I can do. All right, let's try it again. English asks, what does it mean? Italian asks, how does it want to be said? So Eleanor sets it up. It's almost impossible to write something beautiful and profound in the English language. And then she does it. Watch this. I ask, in the way of Italian, which gives words desire, how gray matter wants to be said. It lumbers up from drowse, makes its way to water, fills its trunk, then swings it, making of water a wide arc, in which the sunlight is caught. Meanwhile, in the poetry class, the instructor asks of the image, what does it mean? And the elephant, which by now is a tonnage that wants to get out of the range of reduction, is making its way up the steep trail of the mountain to where the sky invades the peaks, where it wraps itself in clouds, the kind of obscurity that a wary elephant is willing to indulge in. when tracked back toward its lyre. And up there, on the cliffside, near where the clouds are drifting, in and out of the boulders, far above the tree line, a large word, elegy, with a 9-foot wingspan, wants to be said as a condor, one saved from extinction and recently released to the wild. It settles down on a bluff next to the gray cloud, which it understands as an elephant, however obscure it appears. The condor, who is a vulture of sorts, has dirty, pink, wrinkled skin and a cold eye, but is sensitive and quite warm-hearted, and is pleased to consort with the elephant in this safe area where words are said as they wish to be said, weighty or winged as they please, heavy but light as clouds are, or searching in soaring in search of the dead. I think that's just an amazing piece of writing from Ellen there. Well, how am I doing on time? I'm down to about 11, a little after 11:20, and I'm going to do one more poem, and then I'm going to turn it over to however we want to go, or if you've had all that you can stand to this, for you to just get up and say, well, next time I'll know better. This is a poem by another poet we brought to the campus several times, Arizona poet. His name is Richard Shelton. He has been considered the finest evocateur of desert landscape in the history of poetry, all languages, desert poet. And this poem is titled Desert. It is a mantra for me. I repeat this poem very often. I had one full year period where I think I said it to myself every day. It's what I guess the poem states what I would like to be when I grow up. I've sort of given up on that one, but it's still hanging out there, if you will. Desert. Sometimes the sun is still trying to get to the horizon when a daylight moon comes up, fragile and almost transparent, the ghost of a white bird with damaged wings, blown off course and lost in the huge desert sky. It is the least protected of all unprotected things. A little wind goes by on its way through the greasewood to its nest of blue-veined stones, where it will circle 3 times and curl to rest, while darkness drops like a tile from the roof of a tall building. This is a prayer I used to say for me in relationship to my students almost every morning driving to work. This is what I think we're about. There are families of stones under the ground. As the young stones grow, they rise slowly, like moons. when they reach the surface, they are old and holy. And when they break open, they give off a rich odor, each blooming once in the light after centuries of waiting. Those who have lived here the longest and know best are the least conspicuous. The oldest mountains are the lowest, and the scorpion hides all day beneath broken stone. If I stay here long enough, I will learn the art of silence. After I have given up words, I will become what I have to say. Thanks for letting me come home.
We have time for 2 questions if you want. We can sit down for a moment. We have time for just 2 questions, and before that, I just want to, on behalf of everyone, say thank you for coming home, and thank you for sharing those beautiful, beautiful poems with us today. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
I just wanted to ask...
And I was scared spitless.
We have several students in the audience, and we have several students watching online. And so I'd love to ask you, right now, with your background and with your history and your experience and all of your writing, what advice do you have for young college writers, poets, writers? What is the best advice that you would give right now?
I would go back to William Stafford's poem that got turned down 16 times before it ever got accepted, and then became the title of the National Book Award winning book and became one of the top poems ever written in the American language. And I'll go back to somebody else who was a fairly decent writer himself, Willie the Sheik, who in Hamlet had Polonius, who was a pedant. Oh my heavens, he could have outdone me as a professor of English, getting wrapped up in pedantry and going off forever on whatever he was on. But he gives his son advice. His son's going away to college, and all he had to do is say something like, be good and take care. No, don't be good, but take care of yourself and wear your mask. But instead, he's got to give this litany of advice that just makes you just disgusted with him. Just shut up, will you? But that advice, every bit of it, solid. And one in particular, I would say to my students, especially in the area of writing, this above all else, my son, daughter, to thine own self be true. Believe in yourself. And when you've got something that's, you know, is beyond yourself, it's I don't understand how I did it. It's there. Never give up. Hold on to it. I think that's what I'd want to say.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Well, I spent my whole life, some of you have read my books, I spent my whole life arguing with every editor in the United States of America who said, what you're writing is not even poetry. Would you try to write something that rhymes? So,
you've got that rascal side to you. Well, that's great. That is great advice. It speaks to resilience a bit, and that's a topic that we focus on quite a bit with students, and believing in yourself is certainly a part of that. Do you have any advice or comments when you've hit rough patches or dry patches or anything? How have you found resilience?
Boy, this has been the roughest, driest patch of my life.
Oh.
This sequestration period. We were in Spain. We got out of Spain, Book of Job, I think it's either chapter 16 or 18, doesn't matter, but we got out by the skin of our teeth. When we go to Spain, we don't go to think about America. and could care less. Well, that's not true. I was going to say care less who the president is. But in any case, we don't want to think about it. We don't watch television. We don't read the newspapers. We want to be there to have a different kind of life that loves the act of living. We got up Sunday morning, walked outside, and our landlord grabbed us, said, "You can't do that." Can't do what? You can't go outside. The police are patrolling. You will be arrested, fined, and maybe imprisoned. Why? Because I'm an American? No, we all know that. Don't care anymore. No, and he said, COVID, the virus. Don't you know? The only thing I know is it was a complete Democratic hoax. It doesn't exist. Well, we got out by the skin of our teeth, came home to Seaside. And since March, I've not been this close to people since the month of March. That's one reason I was so frightened about coming back. Will I know how to be around people again? And normally you'd think that might, for a writer, be time to really get energetic and do a lot of writing. No, you need people. You may not want to be around them, but you've at least got to have something there to work with. That's the subject matter of it all. So this has been my hardest. And I guess all I can say is I've gone back and reread almost all of my other hero, William Faulkner, and he just over and over and over. It wasn't only the Nobel Award. He said the key to this thing we call life and existence is endure, and by enduring prevail. Well, I'm doing fairly well on exactly half of that maxim. But it's been a kick myself in the butt time. I haven't got a lot of writing done, but it's force yourself to sit down and put the pencil in your hand, and if nothing else, write a letter home to Mama, even if she has been dead 40 years. Move the pencil, and writing. You're a musician. Music begets music. You whistle, and soon you're singing, and soon you're thinking. And it's just do it. Just keep on. Never give up. It's like that frog that's halfway down the crane's throat. He's holding it back there, not going to be swallowed. Never give up. Yeah.
So true. Thank you for that. That's actually a perfect segue to my last question.
Oh.
We will be continuing the conversation on the radio today, KSUU Thunder 91.1 at 3 o'clock, and it'll also turn into a podcast if everybody wants to hear more. But my last question is, as a scholar of Milton, and you mentioned Faulkner as well, is there a writer that for our college students out there, is there a writer that if you were teaching now, every college student should absolutely read beyond others? Can you point to one?
Yes, absolutely. I'll turn it into the desert island question. One book, only one book. And I know my former students can say, "Oh, here we go, Milton again." No. As much as I dearly love Milton and claim him wholeheartedly, if I'm going to take one writer and tell you there's one writer you shall not inherit the kingdom of heaven if you don't read. And it's not Dante. I'm looking at him. It's William Shakespeare. That man knew everything, and he knew every trick in writing that there was to go. If you have read As You Like It, and you haven't fallen in love, at least with the act of falling in love, you've got a heart of lead. If you have read The Tempest and haven't felt yourself rip with every emotion possible, including the ultimate joy of coming back and rejoining with humanity, you got a heart of stone. If you've read King Lear and haven't been totally, with every fiber of your being, horrified by the innate potential depravity of humankind, you have no soul. And if you have read Troilus and Cressida and haven't felt every synapse and nerve ending and intellectual reaction inside your corpus being stimulated, well, go to Hollywood, because you're a character to be cast in a zombie movie. No, Shakespeare. Shakespeare is the one, I would say,
Okay.
Read that one. Read that one.
Well, we have our marching orders, and again,
Okay.
on behalf of everyone at Southern Utah University, thank you for everything you've done for our students, for our campus, for our community over the years, and welcome home. Thank you, David Lee.
I gained more than I gave.
Oh.
Thank you.